Okay, before we begin, I just would like to say with you 2 kapitlach Tehillim for our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land, and for all of our soldiers, and for all of the Jewish people, and for all of the families of the wounded, and of course for all those who are in captivity. So if you could just take a Tehillim, all the Siddurim have a Tehillim in the back, and we'll say 2 kapitlach Tehillim before we begin the class. For all the wounded, for all the families of the wounded, for all those in captivity, for all their families, for all the soldiers, and for all of our brothers and sisters. Of course, for all the families of those who lost loved ones, and all of Klal Yisrael. Let's say Kapitel Kuf Chav Bais and Kuf Chav Gimel, 122 and 123. Kuf Chav Bais and Kuf Chav Gimel. If you have the Art Scroll Siddurim, it's 522, page 522. Or if you have a Tehillim, Kuf Chav Bais. I'll say loud, everybody is of course invited to join. Kuf Chav Bais. Shir Hamalois LeDavid, Samachdi Ba'omrim Li Beis Adonai Nelech, Oim Dois Hayur Ragleinu B'Sharayich Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim Habnuya Ke'ir Shechubra Lo Yachdav, Shesham Alu Shvatim Shifteya Eidus Li Yisrael, Lo Eidus L'Shem Adonai, Ki Shama Yashvu Chisais L'Mishpat Chisais L'Veis David, Shalu Shloim Yerushalayim Yishloyu Oyavoyich Yihi Shalom B'Chelech Shalva Barmanoisayich Laman Achai V'Reyoi Adabra No Shalom B'Ch Laman Beis Adonai Eloheinu Avaksha Toiv Loach Kuf Chav Gimel. Shir Hamalois Elecha Nososius Einai Hayoshvi Bashamoyim Hinei Cheinei Avodim El Yad Adonaiim Keinei Shivcha El Yad Gvirta Keinei Neinu El Adonai Eloheinu Ad Sheyichanenu Chanenu Adonai Chanenu Kirav Savanu Vuz Rabbas Savel Anavshenu Alag Hashananim Habuz Legei Yoinim. Let's just do one more. Kuf Chav Dalet. Shir Hamalois LeDavid Lulei Adonai Shahaya Lanu Yemana Yisrael Lulei Adonai Shahaya Lanu Bekum Aleinu Adam Azai Chaim Blounu Bacharois Apam Banu Azai Hamayim Shtafunu Nachla Avar Al Navshenu Azai Avar Al Navshenu Hamayim Azai Doinim Baruch Adonai Shaloi Nesananu Teref L'Shineim Nafshenu Kitzipur Nimlata Mipach Yokshim Hapach Nishbar V'Anachnu Nimlatnu Ezreinu B'Shem Adonai Oisei Shamayim V'Aretz. Okay, I want to thank Yisrael Litkowski for sponsoring today's class. Thank you very much, and bracha v'hatzlacha in everything. Just 2 important announcements. Next week I'm away, so next Tuesday there will not be a shir. The week afterwards we will resume Be'ezer Hashem. So please tell any relative or friend or community member who comes sometimes that next Tuesday we're off, but the Tuesday after we will resume Be'ezer Hashem. That's number 1. Number 2 is this Thursday evening I'm going to have a special virtual program for children, and allowing them to ask any questions they would like live. It's going to be online, virtual, 6:30 p.m. on Thursday. You could tune into it live at the website theyeshiva.net, theyeshiva.net. They can write in any question. We'll also put a link for Zoom if they want to come on Zoom, or they want to listen by telephone is also fine, for those who don't have internet. And they can ask any question. This is going to be Thursday, 6:30 p.m. Be'ezer Hashem. I'll be sharing some, trying to share some inspiring messages. We'll daven together, we'll learn together, and then we'll give them an opportunity to ask any question. You know, children process things in a very intense way, and they feel much more than people imagine. And they know exactly the state in which their parents are in. So I thought it was very important to be able to create a space for children to be able to express themselves. And I did it during Corona quite a few times, if you remember, with children, and it's very meaningful. So if you have children or grandchildren or friends' children or students, please, Thursday, 6:30 p.m. Yes? There'll be listed a phone number, I don't know. If you go to the yeshiva.net, on the web, on the yeshiva.net. Oh, okay. Do you have a daughter who has nobody? I'll get you the phone number. Okay. Sure. Okay. I'm just going to ask him to make more copies. Okay, I texted him to make more copies. In the meantime, you could share with somebody else. We had Sunday night a program, maybe some of you were on, with Eli Beer, who's the founder and head of United Hatzalah in Israel. He founded Hatzalah in Israel when he was 15 years old after seeing a suicide attack. And so he's on the front lines on a regular Wednesday, certainly now. And he shared with us Sunday night. I had a Zoom with Coach Menachem and Asher Parnas, Let's Get Real show. So Eli Beer was on it, and myself, Dr. Perlman, Akiva Perlman. It's extremely, extremely powerful what he shared. I know there's a lot of, people look for inspiration and chizuk and clarity, so I would suggest that program which we did Sunday night. Again, you could find it on the yeshiva.net, or if you just put in YY Jacobson, Eli Beer in YouTube, you'll probably find it. But it was very, very moving, extremely moving. I don't feel so comfortable today opening with a joke, but I will, because it's just too suitable. It's like the glove for the hand, the right glove for the right hand, for the right size, for the theme we want to explore today. They tell an old anecdote about a Jew, an old Jew. His name was Mr. Finkelstein, and he died, and the family was planning the funeral. The local rabbi, however, was away. He was on a trip to Israel, so they needed a replacement rabbi to officiate at the funeral. So there was a rabbi at the neighboring town, and he agreed to officiate the funeral. The problem is he did not know the deceased. He never met him, he never saw him, he didn't know anything about him, and it was a last minute arrangement that they got him. So he gets up to give a eulogy, but how do you give a eulogy for a person you never met, you never saw, you never heard of? So after the Kaddish and Kel Malei Rachamim and the regular procedures, the rabbi decided to go, with the standard one-size-fit-all eulogy, Acharei Ma'is Gedoshim. And he says, we're here to mourn the passing of a friend, Mr. Finkelstein, a respected citizen of our country and an honorable member of our community. How bad can that be, right? Suddenly, from within the crowd, an old man jumps up and says, what are you talking about? The guy was a ganev, a gazlan, no respected citizen. He wasn't a member of the community. He would steal money from his own grandmother. So the rabbi says, okay. He decides he'll take another approach. He says, we're here to mourn the passing of Mr. Finkelstein, a patron of the synagogue. Another guy gets up, says, a patron of the synagogue. The guy didn't walk into shul for 55 years. 55 years he didn't walk into shul. He didn't give an $18 donation to this community. So what do you do now? He says, okay, I'm sorry. So here's the third approach. He says, we're here to mourn the passing of Mr. Finkelstein, a loving husband and dedicated father. Now it's his wife's turn to jump up and says, you obviously didn't know this man. He was no dedicated father. He was no loving husband. He had no time to spend with his family, no time to spend with his children. In fact, none of his kids spoke to him. They all hate his guts. Was yet? So at this point, the poor rabbi was really lost. And he says, is there anybody in this community who knew Mr. Finkelstein who could say anything nice about him at his funeral? After 5 minutes of silence, a very old man gets up. And he says, yeah, his brother was much worse. Relative to his brother, he was a tzaddik. Now, it seems like just, cute and funny anecdote. But it becomes a real opinion in Gemara and in Rashi in the beginning of Parshas Noach. Literally, what seems like a very funny anecdote and somewhat cynical actually becomes very serious and concretized in the opening of Parshas Noach. If you take a look in your source sheets, the opening pasuk of Parshas Noach is Eila told us Noach. Noach ish tzadik tamim haya b'day reisav esha lehim ishalach Noach. Beautiful words. Beautiful words. It's so beautiful because it's the only human being in the whole Chumash who is defined as tzaddik. I don't know if you realize that. There were many tzaddikim. The only person you'll never find in Chumash, Moshe Rabbeinu called Moshe HaTzadik, or Aaron HaTzadik, or even Avram Avinu, Avram HaTzadik, or Yitzchak, or Yaakov, or Miriam, great people. You go through the whole Tanakh. Yosef, we call him Yosef HaTzadik, but it doesn't say it in Chumash. Even in Tanakh, there's nobody called Tzadik explicitly. There's a pasuk in Amos Michram Bekesef Tzadik, which is alluded to perhaps Yosef, but Shimon HaTzadik is not from Tanakh. Shimon HaTzadik is from Mishnayos. Shimon HaTzadik Hayem Mishari Knesset HaGedolah. He was the high priest in the beginning of the second Bais HaMikdash, after the Tanakh was sealed already. So this is the only person, you have to realize that the only person who's called a tzaddik, and not just a tzaddik tamim, a perfect tzaddik. So these are the generations of Noach. Noach was a righteous man, perfect, a perfect tzaddik. B'day reisav, in his generations, esalakim esalach Noach, Noach walked with Hashem. And this comes right after the end of Parshas Bereshis, where it says that the world, the earth, has become corrupt. Noach was unique. He found grace in the eyes of the Creator. And right after that, we're introduced to the next verse, which again extols his virtues. Comes Rashi, and our sage is always sensitive to nuance, focuses on one word, b'day reisav. Noach was a righteous man, a tzaddik, a perfect tzaddik in his generations. In his generations. Yeah, obviously he lived in his generation. He didn't live in another generation. You can only be a tzaddik in your own generation. What is the Torah trying to say? That he wasn't a tzaddik 1,000 years later, 1,000 years earlier? Yeah, he didn't live then. So Rashi says something fascinating. Yesh mi rabbeinu dershim oisei l'shvach. Among our rabbis, there are those who interpret it as a compliment. They choose to interpret it as praiseworthy. Because it means that if he was righteous in his own corrupt generation, certainly he would have even been a greater tzaddik if he lived in a generation of moral people. So when it says in his generations, it would be like saying even in his generation, even in such a dark hour, when everyone around him was morally depraved, when he had to swim alone against the tide of civilization, which has become demoralized and depraved, even then he was shining. Even then he stood out as a moral, towering, spiritual, and great figure. Certainly, if he would have been in an environment that supported him, that he can befriend people, that his stature was socially acceptable and inspiring, you can imagine how much he would shine. Then Rashi continues, but there are others who interpret this word b'deirosav disgracefully. Lignai means negatively. They take it as not as a compliment, but actually as a denigrating note, as a denigrating comment. Lefi doiroi haya tzadik, ve'ilu haya b'deir shel Avram lo haya nechshav leklum. Relative to his wicked generation, yeah, he was a tzaddik, right? Relative to his brother, he was a good guy. But had he been in Avram's generation, naturally he would not amount to anything. Two interpretations in Rashi. How do you learn? B'day reisav. It could be even in his generation, or only in his generation. Yeah, ish tzaddik tamim, very relative. Don't take these words too seriously. Relative to everybody else. Okay. He passed. He was a good guy. But in another generation, Who would even notice Noach? And here is the very, very obvious question, right? What's the obvious question? If you can give a positive interpretation about Noach, who the Torah says is a tzaddik tamim, you have a choice. You can go this way, you can go that way. Why would some of the sages choose to interpret it negatively? The Mishnah says about everybody, Hevei donas kol adam l'kavschos. In Pirkei Avos, give everybody the benefit of the doubt. Certainly here is a person that the Torah describes him as tzaddik. And as I told you, the only individual in Tanakh that gets this name and tzaddik tamim. Saved the whole world. We're all children of Noach. Nobody is alive who's not a child of Noach. And as a result of that, if you have an opportunity to say b'deirasav means, even in his generations, like Rashi says, yesh dorshe ma'aseh l'shvach. Why would anybody choose a different interpretation? And it's so fascinating. Rashi uses the words yesh mi Rabbi seino dorshe ma'aseh l'shvach. Like there were those few who decided, you know what, let's take this positively. The others, no, it's negative. One of the Mefarshim on Gemara is the last source. I just want to quote you how he describes this question. This is the last source. Be'er Sheva Sanhedrin. One of the commentators of Talmud was a man named Rabbi Yisachar Ber Eilenberg. He lived in the 17th century. He was a rabbi in Poland and Italy and Moravia, and then at the end of his life in Prague. Today, he was one of the great sages of the 16th and 17th century and beginning of 18th century, 16th century and 17th century. So he has a sefer called Be'er Sheva. So take a look how he puts it. He says, Kol Yomai, the last line in the source. It's Kol Yomai Ha'isi Koya. My entire life, I was astounded. I was astonished. All my entire life, he says, Koya. I was like my senses were dulled, like Hakeyas Shinov. I was dulled. I was perturbed. Me'acha she'en lo hechra im lignai. Im l'shvach, nemar b'deiraisav, im kein koshal Rabbi Yochanan, lama moshchoi nafshe l'darsha l'gnai. Since you have different ways of interpreting it, positively or negatively, what prompted Rabbi Yochanan, and we'll see soon what he means with Rabbi Yochanan, to interpret it negatively? That's the question. Now, where did Rashi get this from? Rashi's source is from Gemara. You'll see the second source, Sanhedrin Kuf Ches Amud Aleph. Talmud Sanhedrin, page 108a. Let's see. Eila told us Noach ish tzaddik tamim haya b'deiraisav. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, no less, one of the greatest sages, says b'deiraisav v'loi b'deiras acherim. Only in his generation, not in other generations. It's exclusive to his generation. Reish Lakish amar b'deiraisav kol shekem b'deiras acherim. Reish Lakish, who was Rabbi Yochanan's colleague and brother-in-law, Rabbi Shimon, the son of Lakish, he says, for sure in other generations. So here you see right away the argument that Rashi is quoting. Amar Reb Chanina said, you have it also in English translation, Mashal Rabbi Yochanan lama adav adayma. The metaphor of Rabbi Yochanan can be illustrated. A metaphor for Rabbi Yochanan. L'chaviz shel yayin shoysa monachas b'martav shel chaimetz. There was a jar of wine stored in a cellar filled with jars of vinegar. In such a place, the fragrance of the wine is sensed because of the vinegar's fumes. In any other place, the fragrance of the wine will not be sensed. When you're surrounded with vinegar all around, so you can appreciate the fragrance of the wine, but you take it out of the vinegar, nothing there. Let me give you a metaphor for Reish Lakish's position. A vial of fragrant oil lying amid excrement. If its fragrance is sensed even in such an environment, how much more so amid a spiced and fragrant environment? The oil would only smell even better. So here again we see that Rashi's two opinions are traced back to the Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan, who interprets it in a negative way, and Reish Lakish, who interprets it in a positive way. So it's fascinating how this one word, b'doiraisav, in his generation, allowed itself and lends itself to opposing interpretation. But here's the question: why choose a critical view when you can choose a complementary view? Now, this would be true with any person, especially here. It's like, cut the man some slack. It's almost like a mitzvah. If we could say, the Torah is trying to be mevatel him. I'm telling you he's a tzaddik, I'm telling you he's a tam, I'm telling you that God loves him, God is saving him, he's the one who rescued the world from the flood. But let me tell you the truth, gornished. It's not for your family, no shidduch. It's not for your family. Yeah. Of course, relative to Stalin and Hitler. Of course, relative to Hamas and Hezbollah is a tzaddik, shoin. There's something distasteful about it with any person, especially with Noach, who the Torah goes out of its way to extol his virtues and bring out his greatness. Later in Parshas Noach, Hashem turns to Noach and says, I found you as a righteous person in this generation. God himself is speaking to Noach and says this. So it's almost, what's this instinct in us to right away have to cut him down, from 6 spiritual feet to 1 foot. It's fascinating that the 2 people who argue about this are Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, as you could see. And their history is very telling in the context, when you approach it from the context of this argument. Because Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara says in Tractate Kiddushin, he was orphaned at an early age. His grandfather placed him in the yeshiva to study, and right from the start he was surrounded by extraordinary teachers and scholars and friends, and he grew up in an environment of learning and of holiness. His brother-in-law Rish Lakish came from a very, very different background. The Gemara says in Baba Metzia and other places that Rish Lakish was actually a leader of a group of bandits and thieves. He had a reputation for great strength and was considered a person who had a wild and violent streak. He also had great leadership skills, and he had very high intelligence. Our sages say that on his spare time, to enhance his income, he worked as a gladiator. His fearlessness and his might, his physical might, were legendary. And the Gemara tells a story, it's quite a story. Rabbi Yochanan, who was considered one of the greatest scholars of his age, and also a man of tremendous hadras panim, his countenance was extraordinary. He lived in the 3rd century after the Common Era, in the 200s. And he was bathing in the Jordan River. In Eretz Yisrael, he was bathing in the Jordan River. The Gemara tells the story about Metzia, page 84. And all of a sudden, Rish Lakish noticed him, and he plunged into the water. Rish Lakish jumped into the water, into the Jordan River, and he swam over to Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Yochanan looked at him, and his intentions were not noble. Rabbi Yochanan looked at him and said, Chelach la'oraisa, such strength you have belongs to Torah. Rish Lakish did not remain indebted, and he looks at Rabbi Yochanan and he said, and such beauty belongs to women. You're telling me to change my career, you should change your career. So Rabbi Yochanan says, you think I'm beautiful? Wait till you meet my sister. And if you transform yourself, I will ask my sister if she wants to marry you. Rish Lakish became one of the greatest sages of the generation, and he married Rabbi Yochanan's sister. And throughout the Gemara, there's constant debates between these two. They became like best friends and colleagues, and 2 of the greatest Torah giants of this generation. Now here in Gemara, they're arguing about Noach. So Rabbi Yochanan, who grew up in an environment of holiness and sanctity, he says about Noach, in his generation he was great, but in another generation he wouldn't amount to anything. Rish Lakish, who knew about what it means to struggle amidst darkness, he knew what it means to grow up in an environment of moral depravity, he knew about the tests and the challenges and the trials that Noach may have endured because of the world he lived in. So Rish Lakish sees him in another light. Rish Lakish says, wow, I am amazed by Noach. If he would have been in a different place, his light would have radiated even more. So this may give some context to the argument, but still, we're still perturbed by the fact. Let's say Rabbi Yochanan grew up in a beautiful environment, in a very holy environment. Granted, but why would he feel compelled to downsize Noach's moral character? This is something that Mefarshim have struggled over the generations with. As I quoted you, the Be'er Sheva himself, who says, Kol Yamai, my entire life, this bothered me. It bothered me. You're talking about the greatest sages of the time. You're talking about Rabbi Yochanan. Rashi quotes it. Rashi quotes it as the second interpretation. In the Gemara, it's the first. Rashi first says, there are those who give it a complimentary interpretation, and there are those who give it a negative one. And this Rashi, remember, Rashi doesn't quote every Medrash or every Gemara. Rashi says clearly, I'm here to explain the straightforward interpretation so that a child understands Chumash. Rashi's function is to give the literal, most straightforward interpretation. Why does Rashi feel compelled to even quote this negative interpretation and saying, if he would have been in the generations of Avram, he would have been nothing? Also, the words of Rashi are a little disturbing. Rashi says, "Ilo haya b'doyer shel Avram, lo haya nechshav leklum." You know what lo haya nechshav leklum means? He would amount to nothing. Amount to nothing? Like, nobody amounts to nothing. He wouldn't be like Avram Avinu, I understand. Lo haya nechshav leklum. It was like he would amount to nothing. Like you wouldn't even notice him, you wouldn't even look at him. It's not just saying relative to Avram, maybe you wouldn't call him a tzaddik, or such a tzaddik, but it's something is amiss. It's almost like, you know, do we have this beef with Noach from somewhere that we like some kenish verginnen? You know what verginnen means, right? Everybody knows what verginnen means. I don't know how to do it in English. Well, we can't vergin to say that Noach was a great man, a tzaddik tamim. Is anybody going to lose from that? Especially he's the Zayda of everybody. He's everybody's Zayda. It's like it's our own family. We come from Noach and his wife and his children. They were the only survivors of the Mabul. Everybody has where to sit? Okay. Okay. On Shiazuk. So over the generations, many commentaries have been given to this. Maybe you should come to the front. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Interesting. Oig Melech HaBashar, you say, may have had descendants. Very good. Chenish getracht. Yes, welcome. Thank you for coming. When you come, you give your light to the whole class, though. Thank you. You're the pillar. You're the pillar. I'm the speaker. You're the pillar. Thank you. That's true. Oig was a male. He would need a female. You understand what I'm saying? So you would have to find a female that was a descendant of Noach. Very good. We have bright students here. Okay. Great question, great answer. Well, it says that Oig survived the flood. He stayed on the Teva. And he survived the flood, right? He's called the survivor, Vayaveh HaPolit. So it doesn't say clearly in Chumash, but one of the interpretations of Chazal is that he was a polit. He was a survivor of the Mabul. Yeah. And he went, and he's the one who told Avram Avinu. It says he's told Avram Avinu about the war in which Lot was abducted. It says the polit came. In other words, who's the polit? Some survivor. Polit is like She'eris HaPleita, a survivor. So that's how they interpreted it. He survived the flood. So she was asking, so then we can also come from Oig. So our other genius explained that he still needs a female, right, to be able to have children. Okay, and that had to come from Noach. There's a very moving and powerful interpretation that was once presented on Parshas Noach by the Lubavitcher Rebbe to explain this perspective, this position of Rabbi Yochanan and Rashi, which seemingly wants to or tries to denigrate Noach, and apparently, as I said, for no logical reason to do that. When you read through Chumash, or you read through Tanakh, or you read through Gemara, Mishnayos, Medrashim, works of history among the Jewish people, of course, and also in all of society, you see the Tanakh, the Mishnah, the Talmud, the Medrash. It's filled with narratives of great heroes, of great individuals. It doesn't skip over flaws, it doesn't skip over mistakes. The Tanakh never does that. It doesn't whitewash anything. But you're dealing with people who are obviously of extraordinary stature and moral caliber, intellectual, spiritual, physical, emotional, psychological, and in terms of righteousness, tzitkus. Whether you're talking about Avram Avinu, Sarah, Yitzchak, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, Yaakov, etc., Yosef, Moshe Rabbeinu, of course, Aaron, Miriam, Dvorah, Shmuel, Shimshon, the Nevi'im, Yirmiyah, Yeshaya, Cheskel, Amos, etc. Esther Hamalka, Mordechai HaTzadik. And then if you go to later generations, you mentioned Shimon HaTzadik, and you go through the great leaders of the second Bais HaMikdash, when you're talking about Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi, Ezra HaSofer, the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, all the way down through the generations till the Churban of Bayesheni, and you have the greatest of Tanoim, from Hillel to Shammai, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, etc., etc. All of these names share a common streak. They were all remarkable human beings, men or women, in terms of their moral stature, intellectual depth, courage, fearless character, spiritual saintliness and holiness. It places them head and shoulders above ordinary human beings, even though each of them was a human being, which is their greatness. They were human beings. They weren't angels who lived in heaven, they lived on earth. When we read about these types of heroes, there's a thought that often creeps in, and that is, Superman can fly. Yeah. I mean the fictional one. A big tzaddik can make a difference. A big person, a great personality, whether it's a great military leader or a great spiritual leader, they make a difference. But how about the regular person? How about Joe the plumber, in the famous expression? What about the ordinary individual looking in the mirror? What destiny? What does destiny hold for the ordinary, cut-of-the-mill individual who is not necessarily, this great giant blessed with unique talent, skills, or resources, or a great spiritual soul that they do have to develop and cultivate, but have special gifts, whether it's a Moshe Rabbeinu or Avram Avinu? And this is where Noach comes into the picture. The rabbis, Rabbi Yochanan and the other rabbis, they weren't less nuanced, they were more nuanced. And when they studied Parshas Noach, they saw a few interesting things that the Torah depicts about Noach. The first thing is, Noach in Parshas Noach is called Ish HaAdama, a man of the earth. After the flood, Torah says, Vayachal Noach Ish HaAdama, a farmer who works with the earth. Very interesting expression. Moshe Rabbeinu is called in Chumash Ish HaElokim. Not Roetzon too, he's a shepherd, but his title, right? Zois HaBracha Sheberach Moshe Ish HaElokim Lifnei Moshe. Before his death, he's called a man of God, a divine human being, a channel for God. Noach, before his death, what is he called? Ish HaAdama, a man of the earth. Moshe Rabbeinu was also a man of the earth. Like he said, he was a shepherd. He may not have been a farmer, but he dealt with sheep and he helped them graze and feed them. But he becomes Ish HaElokim. Noach actually starts off in the beginning of the parsha, Ish Tzaddik. At the end he's called Ish HaAdama, a farmer. What's the last story we know about Noach after the flood? What's the last story? I mean, he saves the whole world. What happens? He's a farmer, he plants a vineyard, and he gets drunk. He gets drunk and he becomes exposed, and his son Chaim goes and tells the other brothers, Shem and Yafes, and they go and they cover him with a cloak. So basically, the only story we know about Noach, outside of the fact that he built a teva, he built an ark, he brought his family into the ark, he brought the animals into the ark, he brought food into the ark, and he spent there a long time, and then he came out. The only other story is that he was a farmer, he planted a vineyard, he became intoxicated and inebriated, and he exposed himself. That's all. We don't know anything else about Noach. Not only that, the rabbis were sensitive to another detail. In the beginning of Parshas Noach, in the middle of Parshas Noach, it says that Noach came into the teva mipnei mei hamabel, because of the waters of the flood. Obviously, he came in because of the flood. He didn't come in for another reason. That's the whole story. So they say, Rashi quotes it, Noach, af Noach miktane amanohaya. Even Noach didn't have so much faith. If the flood wouldn't begin and wouldn't start, the water wouldn't start rising higher and higher, and he also wouldn't have gone into the teva. So the Torah says, do you know why he went into the flood? Because the water was already filling the house and he had no choice, so he finally was schlepped into the flood. Into the teva, the ark. In the Haftarah of Noach, we have the Haftarah of Yeshayahu Hanavi, and he calls the flood Mei Noach, the waters of Noach, which is strange. It's not the waters of Noach, it's the waters from which Noach survived. So the Zohar says because Noach didn't pray for his generation. So therefore, even though he was a good person and he was saved, but there's some level of responsibility he carries, unlike Moshe Rabbeinu, who would pray for his generation again and again and again. Noach took care of himself, he took care of his family, but he did not try to influence or pray for his generation. What was their conclusion from all of this? Their conclusion from all of this was that Noach was a good person. He was a moral person. He tried to live a decent life, tried to do what Hashem wants, but not without his flaws and doubts and struggles. But then they said, let's go for the next step here and see what the Torah is trying to tell us. Look what this person achieved. Look what this human being achieved in a society dripping with greed and temptation. Noach held to his morals. Es helikim is alech Noach. He walked with the Rebbeinu Shalom. He swam against the tide, and he saved the entire planet from destruction. Civilization, in other words, survived not because of a towering, extraordinary moral giant, but because of a simple man who had the courage to live morally when everyone around him behaved despicably. So remarkably, let's understand what's happening here. By Rabbi Yochanan and Rashi quoting that opinion, which is degrading Noach and stating that in other generations Noach would be eclipsed, they actually turn him into maybe the most inspiring figure, or one of the most inspiring figures in Tanakh. You know why? He is the hero for the simple people. He is the hero for the regular people. He is the hero for ordinary men and women. So Noach becomes my hero, the hero of the ordinary cut-of-the-mill individual who may not be the most extraordinary giant and saint and towering figure and warrior and greatest thinker or leader or man of or woman of absolute subliminal transcendence. By explaining the text the way they did, seeing all the clues in the Parsha that complement Noach, but also bring out another side of him, when they hear the word B'doirasav in his generation, what Rabbi Yochanan and Rashi are trying to tell us is that Noach becomes a symbol for ordinary people. People who may have flaws. People who can get drunk. People like Noach, the end of his life doesn't seem remarkable at all. He appreciates a fine cup of wine, maybe a little schnapps, maybe sometimes a little too much schnapps. And yet, this person saved the entire world from destruction. So the message of Noach and the message of these sages is, you don't have to be Avram Avinu, a Moshe Rabbeinu to save the world, to transform the world. Noach was another kid on the block. Noach was that regular person. In fact, if you would put him in another generation and put him up against Avram Avinu, you wouldn't even be able to say about Noach Ish Tzadik Tamim. And yet look what this person, what this very ordinary person did. With his courage not to follow that line of corruption and fakeness and falsehood, with basic decency and compassion and friendliness and goodness, he created the teva and he saved civilization. So Noach wasn't a saint Thank goodness. We've heard enough about saints in our lives. We know there's great extraordinary saints. Now tell me about real people. Real people who struggle with fear, with doubt, with pain, with traumas, with whatever they may be struggling with. The person whose IQ is not extraordinary. The person who is not the Gadol Shebegdolim. But he was a good person trying to do the right thing at a very difficult time, and look what he accomplished. So now we can appreciate the words of Rashi. When you look at the words of Rashi, he says, "Ilo haya b'derish l'Avram, lo haya nechshav l'klum." L'klum means insignificant. In other words, he's not saying Noach was a bad person. He wasn't a bad person. He was a good person. But when you would look about Avram Avinu, you would say, what's the significance of this person relative to Avram Avinu? You would say, there's no significance here. And that's the whole story. The whole story is how many people look in the mirror and say, what significance do I have? What power do I have? I'm just a simple human being trying to go about my daily life. I'm a fine person, not trying to hurt anybody. But you're going to put me in the presence of Avram Avinu and compare? What significance is there? Comes the Torah and says, he is the person who saved the entire world. Every person who's here today is only here because of Noach. So that's this greatness. That world wasn't saved by a Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest tzaddik who ever lived, the greatest Navi who ever lived. This first of all, they tell you who Noach was, and they tell you Noach now becomes the most inspiring figure because Noach teaches the power of an ordinary person. Right. Right.
And Moshe Rabbeinu had Kodesh Baruch Hu picked him. So I don't know. So Reish Lakish would be the one who would say the Mokum She'ein Ish because he knows how hard it is to be a person and do it different.
Right. So that's why Reish Lakish is the one who says that for sure in other generations. Rabbi Yochanan says in his generation he was a tzaddik tamim. In other generations not. So we asked the question, if you could say something nice, why do you have to say something negative? So one of the answers is, on the contrary, this Rabbi Yochanan was studying the text. He saw that the Torah gives different clues, that Noach had different sides to him. And he says, this is why the Torah uses the word b'deraisav to teach us this most incredible lesson. And that is, who are the people who can change society, who can make an impact on an individual or a collective, and someone to save the world? It's a Noach. A Noach who in another generation may be eclipsed. So this becomes the symbol, the hero, for the ordinary individual. The person who looks in the mirror and doesn't see themselves as the Gadol Adar, and may not be in that sense. And yet from the Jewish perspective, the impact is something one can't even estimate, both in terms of themselves, their environment, the Jewish people, and the entire world. Now, sometimes you read biographies about leaders or about rabbis or about individuals, men or women, and it can get a little frustrating because there's a distance created between the ordinary human being and the person you're writing about. It's like they go into a different category. At the age of 6, he already knew the whole Tanakh. At the age of 8, he already knew the whole Gemara. So what it does is it creates a barrier where, it's nice, it's interesting, it could be inspiring, but it often doesn't relate to the person, especially that there's no trace of struggle, failure, crisis, doubt, temptation, confusion, adversity, stumbling, and so on and so forth. So the person looks and says, obviously, I'm not in this category. I'm very, very far away from it. Sometimes it's a dishonest portrayal, and even if it is an honest portrayal, it's it's very hard for me to emulate somebody who's, flawless and extraordinary on so many levels. This is what Rabbi Yochanan Rashi is saying is, emulate Noach. Noach becomes the symbol. Noach is the only person called tzaddik in the whole Tanakh. But you just told me that relative to Avram, he was nothing. That's exactly the point. And that's the person who's considered the tzaddik of Tanakh. I want to emulate Noach, the person who may be simple in many ways, and may have ups and downs, and may have failed and stumbled. Right? And at the end of his life, there's a story that's not so complimentary in Chumash itself. But he was true to his soul. He was true to his God. He was true to his morality. This means in my own way, in your own way, in living your life with your personality and your character and your dispositions and your marriage and your relationships and your home and your children. You, that individual, the individual person can be a beacon of love and light and hope and empowerment. Construct an ark where others can find shelter from a flood of pain and insanity and promiscuity and immorality. And when I want to give the excuse, I'm just a regular woman, I'm a regular man, I'm just trying to have, supper ready. Like, this is where Noach comes in. Not everybody is Moshe Rabbeinu. But Noach is the hero for the simple person. Everybody could be a Noach. That's what they're saying. Everybody could be a Noach. As somebody once said, I'm only one, but I'm one. I can't do everything, but I can do something. And what I can do, I ought to do. And in my mind, this truth is emerging these days in a very, very powerful way, especially with our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land. When Hamas, Yimach Shemam v'Zichram, attacked in the pogrom and the war of Simchas Torah, Tavshin Pei Dalet, Shabbos morning, 6 o'clock or 6:30 a.m., the southern communities, this was an attack that was planned for a year or maybe 2 years, as I heard from some Israeli experts, apparently with the imprints of Iran, because it was a brilliant attack, strategically designed and orchestrated in such an intricate and extraordinary way, to the point that it allowed the first level of the defense forces to be paralyzed for quite a significant amount of hours. And those hours, there's an expression in Hoshainus, right? Hoshaina l'shalosh shois. Those few hours were critical because it's when the massacres and the kidnapping and the brutality took place, the early hours of Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah. The first level of the defense line between Gaza and Israel was broken, and it was broken through many different, very, very brilliant methods that they achieved to be able to paralyze and silence that first response. In their plan, till you mobilize an army, the regular army, which is comprised of soldiers in other places of the country and of course reservists, that takes time. What they didn't know is about the second army in between the first and the third. Eli Beer told me in the session that they wanted to go to Yerushalayim. They were planning to go to Yerushalayim. And what happened was, after a few hours, when people started to realize from all over the country, especially closer to the south, regular citizens who have been trained or in training went and sacrificed their lives to save whoever they could save. And of course they saved hundreds, and they killed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of terrorists. It took so much time for people to be able to realize what's happening. And every day you hear literally dozens of stories of individual people, regular individuals who went into the line of fire and literally saved soul after soul after soul in impossible and horrific conditions, because you're talking about an army of around 1,000 or 1,500 terrorists that were prepared with maps and strategy, and everybody knew where to go, and everybody had a different position. And completely unexpected, Israel was caught completely off guard, tragically. And you may have saw the story about that woman in Ofakim, Rachel Edry. She was held up with her husband for close to 20 hours. Now, why didn't they just come in and shoot her like they did to so many others? Rachel Edry didn't have a gun to shoot back. What she had was a weapon that actually helped her, cookies. It's just an incredible story, about her state of mind and her warmth. I saw one of the interviews with her, she said, I knew that hungry men are much more dangerous than well-fed men, which I thought many of you can appreciate. Lahavdil. So they come in, five Hamas terrorists. She offers them cookies and makes a coffee, and they're enjoying her hospitality. And one of them wants Coca-Cola. She doesn't have classic Coca-Cola, she has some new version of Coca-Cola. And they start screaming at her, we want Coca-Cola. And she's laughing now. She's like, of course, let me go get Coca-Cola. She bandages one of them. She says, teach me Arabic. So now they're teaching her Arabic, I'll teach you Hebrew. And she knows her objective is one thing. Her objective is to buy time until hopefully security forces, the IDF, could come in and save her. It happens to be that two of her sons are policemen, and they're involved in the rescue, and they rescue both of their parents. You read this, her fortitude, her she said, my house, I give hospitality. just an extraordinary, and stories after stories of people who in the hardest of conditions literally rose out of the abyss, out of such horrors, to be able to perform miracles and save every soul that was saved, despite the horrible casualties and brutality and those that were kidnapped. Somebody shared with me about a cousin of theirs. His name is Dekel Suissa, 23-year-old boy, a platoon commander. And when Hamas began to attack 6:30 a.m. on Shabbos, so Dekel had his whole unit in the army base hide in the bomb shelter, and he said, I'm going to go take them on. He didn't know what he's taking on. And he went out, and he single-handedly killed 60 terrorists. 60 terrorists this man killed while protecting his entire platoon. They were in a bomb shelter. There was one last standing terrorist at the end, and he shot and killed Dekel at the end. And I saw one of his soldiers in his platoon said, he fought for us until his last drop of blood and saved our lives. He didn't want to allow us to even touch danger. I saw a story of a 53-year-old man. His name is Aaron Tzaref. He lives in the kibbutz Magen. And he woke up Simchas Torah in the morning, 6 in the morning, and he goes out of the house just to survey the environment. A regular Shabbos morning, he knows it's close to God, he wants to survey the environment. He's standing alone on an elevated mound in this kibbutz Magen, and suddenly he sees the Hamas monsters arriving. 600 feet away, he sees 10 motorcycles, 3 pickup trucks. They all came in with motorcycles and pickup trucks, filled with people screaming in Arabic. It wasn't hard for him to understand what's happening. They approach the fence to his kibbutz. Their objective is to get in and, slaughter every single person alive or kidnap them if possible. They begin to cut the fence. He's standing on the mound. He puts himself into a protective position, and he begins to shoot. He's alone on the mound, 6:30 or 6:20 a.m. Simchas Torah, and he shoots just one after another, one by one, just shooting. They keep on falling. The next one arrives, he shoots him too. Finally, people in the kibbutz hear this shooting, so some other people come to assist him. For 7 hours, this man protected his kibbutz. For 7 hours. The entire community was saved. Only at 1 p.m., 7 hours later, from 6 to 1, does help begin to arrive. This will be recorded as one of the greatest military and political and intelligence disasters in the history of Israel, probably the greatest one. You have hundreds of stories coming out now of extraordinary, ordinary people who lived and died, saving countless others in a massacre that nobody could believe was happening. I saw an interview in Kikara Shabbat with a guy named Yair Ansbacher. Yair Ansbacher works in a unit that trains to fight terrorists. So he's well versed with this, and he said Simchas Torah in the morning he woke up and he was going to shul. It was around 8 o'clock, he woke up, he was going to shul, he said he went to the mikveh, and then he decided to go to shul, of course, for Hakafas. In Eretz Yisrael, Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah is together. And then he hears a siren, which is not unusual in Israel, unfortunately, because of missiles. And he said his father, who was walking with him to shul, tells him, this is something more serious. And then he started to see different signs. And he said, I went into my house, woke up his wife, and said, there's a war, I'm going to be fine, I got to go. And 5 minutes later, he was out of the house on the way down to the south. And he went to the kibbutzim where the massacres were happening. He mobilized others. And it seems like he killed many, many, many terrorists. And he was describing, he said, in one of the kibbutzim, he went in to a house, and there was a family or a few families who were hiding in a bomb-sheltered room where many people were hiding, and if the ceiling was good, many of them were saved that way because the terrorists couldn't get in, or at least it was very hard for them to get in, so they went to other destinations. And he says the people inside didn't want to let them in because they came dressed. As you know, the terrorists came dressed, many of them in Israeli uniforms. So they didn't want to open up. And then he started to speak about Hoshana Rabbah and Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah until he convinced them that he was one of their brothers. And he says they opened up the door, and they were there for hours and hours and hours. You know, families, men, women, children. And he says what I did was, I just went over and I kissed every single one. And they kissed me. And then he looked at the interview and he said something so powerful. He said, now wherever I go, I have one craving. I want to kiss every single Jew I meet. I want to kiss every single Jew I meet. And he explained something very powerful. And he said, and I realized that that's the truest sentiment of the Jewish people. You know, what often happens with us is we live on different vibrations. You know, I could live on a vibration of guilt, of shame, of fear, of paralysis. These are vibrations. My emotions are flowing when I'm in a state of guilt, or in a state of shame, or in a state of fear, or in a state of hate or judgmentalism. There's always a vibration, but it's a very low vibration. Love, empathy, connectedness, openness is a much higher vibration. The Jewish people, you know, we can all live on different vibrations. What happened in this time of crisis is it touched us to the core. So people respond with their core. And on a core level, really all Jews want to do when they meet another Jew is kiss them, hug them, embrace them. I'm not talking about your own brother and sister, mother, father, children, obviously. But even that Jew, he didn't know. He never met him before. The Baal Shem Tov once said, it says, Kol Yisrael arevim zeh b'zeh. The Gemara says, all Jews are guarantors for each other. We're responsible for each other. So the Baal Shem Tov, the word arevim in Hebrew means three things. It means arevim is guarantor, a guarantor. Arevim also comes from the word sweet, arev, right? V'harevna, v'seravna, right? Harev, machal arev is a sweet food. And arevim also means mixed, like arev, like erev, making an erev, taruvas, to mix. So the Baal Shem Tov said, Kol Yisrael arevim zeh, all the Jews are mixed in with each other. They're integrated. They're one, interconnected. It's like one large soul manifested in different bodies. And therefore, Kol Yisrael arevim zeh, so therefore, ein yid is zispat zweite yid. A Jew triggers sweetness in another Jew. Natural. It's like when you look at your little angelic baby of yours or your neighbor, your friend, and there's a sense of sweetness. And that therefore, arevim also means responsible. It comes from the internal connection and sweetness. And this is what this war brought out. You know, in Israel, there was a lot of fighting, as you know. And it's probably something that was, Eli Beer said that everybody was so busy fighting, they couldn't be busy protecting the country from a sworn enemy that wants to just see every Jew dead, and they couldn't care less what type of yarmulke you're wearing, or if you're wearing a yarmulke or not. If you have Jewish blood flowing in your sinews, you have to die. We were affected at the core. So we respond on a core, and on a core level, the authentic, organic Jewish vibrancy is one of tremendous unity. And because that's reality. Reality is that we are one. That's reality. It's like reality is I'm one with my arm and with my head and with my heart. Reality is not that I should be amputated, chas v'shalom, and amputate my limbs and get into a fight between limbs and organs. That's unnatural. It's a very, very sick vibe. So I can go into that vibe, especially in regular days. I can live in that vibe, a vibe of judgmentalism and a vibe of negativity and a vibe of animosity. What Yair Ensbacher was saying is that the organic, authentic state of the Jewish people has emerged now in a very, very powerful way. And the reason is because everybody knows exactly how you feel when you read about a child being kidnapped to Gaza, how you feel when you read about the Jews murdered or wounded, how you feel about when you hear about the event, you see how it touches you, and like it, and people say, I understand if it's a relative, I understand if I know somebody. It doesn't have to do with that. There's something that's deeper than anything else, and that's the state of oneness of the Jewish people, a divine people that is organically connected forever, and therefore the relationship is very powerful. And it's the most powerful thing. And when it gets touched, when that level of frequency gets touched, when that level of vibration gets touched, it's not even a question. Yair was describing that he was coming with a group of soldiers. They went into a gas station just to fill up with gas. A few days, like this week, this week, and he said the guy came out and said, "Take whatever you want from this store. Hakol shalachem, it's all yours." He says, we didn't take anything because we didn't feel comfortable. But this is a guy who's living, he has a gas station with his falafel stand, I don't know what he has. He says, take everything. This whole thing is yours. That was a natural, organic, inner sense of connection that emerged. He shared something else that was very powerful. And he said the next day, he came home late at night, after, 15, 20 hours of fighting for every Jewish life and cleaning up the kibbutz from terrorists. And finally he had to go home. He needed a few hours of sleep. And he says he woke up the next day and he couldn't daven. In the morning you wake up and you daven. He woke up early the next day and he couldn't daven. The sights of what he saw and the pain of what he experienced. So finally now, when he was taking a few moments to meditate, he says he just couldn't pray. He couldn't get himself to talk to God. Like he felt so much pain and horror, and he was just overwhelmed. That's what he said on this interview, Kikar Shabbat, Yair Ensbacher. So he said he needed some inspiration. So this is what he said. He opened up a book of letters from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. It's called Igros Kodesh. He opened up, and he opens up to a page, and there's a letter. A person writes to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, I can't get myself to daven. I'm not in the mood. I have so many issues and challenges. I just can't get myself to daven. So he started to cry on the interview, and he said the Rebbe writes back to this person and says there are moments that you are not a small individual anymore. There are moments you have to realize you are the Jewish people. You are the Jewish people. So daven to Hashem from a position that you are the Jewish people. He says there are moments in life when I'm an individual and it's just me through you. He says there are moments in life when you transcend yourself as an individual person and you embody the Jewish people. Try to daven like that. And he said, that's what he decided to do. He said, I'm not Yair Ensbacher now anymore. I am now the Jewish people. That's who I am. And he started to talk to God from the Jewish people because he suddenly felt that he was the collective Jewish people. There was no individual me versus you. And now I'm working with my issues, and I have my issues, but something else came out in him. And he said it was an incredible prayer. It gave him so much courage and clarity. Nobody can take away the pain. Nobody has to take away the pain. It's not even right to take away the pain. It's a very painful time. That the job is not make myself feel better and say it's vanilla ice cream. It's a very painful time for the Jewish people, especially mothers who have children on the front lines, and fathers who have children on the front lines, and families of wounded people. People talk about the 1,400 who were killed. There's 3,000 who were wounded. Some of them, when we say wounded doesn't mean they got a scratch or they need Tylenol. You're talking about people that are wounded, some of them critically with effects that are very, very profound. Forget about 3,000 people wounded. You know how many families are affected for life? And then there's the kidnapped. So there's a tremendous pain. In a time of war, one can't eliminate pain. One must have resolve, courage, confidence. Clarity is the gift of the hour. Not serenity and tranquility to the point that, life is just rosy. Serenity in the point that I know who I am and what I need to do at this moment. I also need to address one detail here because I got an email from a few people. I know it's going to be uncomfortable for some people that I address it, but I think since it's not addressed so much in our community, I got an email recently from a few people, women and men, who come from Hasidic communities, who grew up with very negative sentiments to Israel. I probably don't have to elaborate. Some of you probably understand which communities I'm talking about. These are innocent, fine, ehrliche women. A lot of them come to our class and other classes, but they grew up their whole life that the state of Israel is the greatest sin of the Jewish people. It's responsible for horrible things. Until Mashiach, Jews are not allowed to have a country. This is a philosophy that some Jews had, and they educate their children that way. And now a lot of these people feel emotionally stuck because their hearts are telling them, your brothers are at war. But their whole education seems to be telling them, this is a whole different story, and this whole thing with Israel and an army and soldiers. I just want to address this for a moment, especially some people who asked me to address this, and some of them are connected to this class as well. I think it's just important for you to understand. This is completely not connected to any of the arguments that rabbis and sages and leaders had in the past century about the state of Israel and its role. Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it a great miracle? Is it the opposite of a miracle? We're talking now completely different reality. And that is, you're talking about 6.6 million Jews living in Israel. Okay? Even if you would ask the Satmar Rebbe B'chvoidei Ba'atzmai, Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum, who was a great, great opponent of the fact that Jews should have a state before the war. Forget even about Israel. Let's say New Jersey or Williamsburg or Monroe had 6.6 million Jews living there. Forget about Israel or Australia, anywhere. And you had around it millions and millions of people who want to kill every single Jewish child. What is the responsibility of the Jewish people according to Torah? There's one responsibility. The responsibility is to save lives. So don't allow yourself to get confused with theological and philosophical and halachic and spiritual discussions about the state of Israel and who runs the state of Israel and the secularism of the state, etc., which are all legitimate discussions. But you're talking about a fact that you're talking about the fact that you're dealing with a nation, one sheep, surrounded by 70 wolves who have one agenda, and the agenda is to murder every single Jew. That is what we're facing. This is the war that the Jewish people are facing today. As I said, if Hamas would have it their way, they would be happy to do this every single day, 3 times a day, and for them, Simchas Torah would be every day. This is who you're talking about. The reason they don't do this every day is simply because of God's grace and an army. Without that, they would do it every single day. As I said on the program, if Hamas would go on vacation for 3 years, for 3 years they would go to Hawaii, a sponsored vacation to Hawaii for 3 years, okay? Would one person in Gaza be killed or wounded by an Israeli soldier, by a tank, by a missile? Nobody, not one person. If the Israeli army would go on vacation for 1 week, there wouldn't be one Jew left alive in Israel al pi derech hateva. This is what we have to understand. This is what you're dealing with. The moral equivalency between two sides is one of the most appalling equations in all of history. There was never a situation that Jews target a child, that want to kill an Arab child. Sadly, the monsters use children as human shields so they can attack Jewish children, and then you hide behind an Arab child, and in collateral damage, when that happens because they're trying to defend their own children, now you can get the whole world to blame Israel, as they're doing today again. And sane people, moral people, to make that equivalency, that comparison is appalling, it's horrific. And when Jews lack this clarity and decisiveness, It's very, very demoralizing, and it's very, very damaging. So my point to all of you, my dear brothers and sisters, who may be confused, the only issue right now is the indestructible reality of the Jewish people. The good news is we're going to win. We're not going to be defeated. We were never defeated. We never will be defeated. Hashem promised the Jewish people through the Nevi'im, Atem b'nei Yaakov lo yichilisem. If you don't kill, before they kill you, they're first going to have to kill me. Once you get rid of God, then you can get rid of the Jewish people. The Jewish people are going to win. We're going to emerge triumphant and even stronger and even more powerful and even more united. That's not a question. The end game is very, very clear. In this long, arduous, and dark journey, though, we need clarity and we need decisiveness. Don't let yourself be confused with the rhetoric of Sinai Yisrael, who couldn't care less when 1.5 million Jewish children were gassed in Auschwitz, and they couldn't care less about children being murdered today. They don't care. It doesn't. They sleep at night fine, even if there may be decent people in their lives. But Jewish people have to understand that if we are not united in our resolve to protect our people and our children, everyone in their own way, spiritually, physically, financially, emotionally, it may not nili mili. We have each other and God, the Rebbeinu Shalom. And that can't be compromised, ever. Now, as time goes on, things change. People sometimes lose the courage and the clarity that you have in the beginning of a war. Because that's how it is. You know, life moves on, and people go back to normal, and everyone has to go back to normal. What are they going to do? So it's very, very important not to lose this. Because the feelings of Avos Yisrael that have emerged in the last few days, in Israel and outside of Israel, are very historic. And it's very easy when things go back to normal to fall back into a much lower frequency. Judgmentalism is a very normal emotion. It's a fact, it's a survival skill. Sometimes I read people's emails or I meet people and people share opinions that I really disagree with, and it's very easy for me to go into a place of judgmentalism. But I know when I'm going to a place of judgmentalism, I'm operating on the vibration of ego, not on the vibration of soul. The ego is fragile. In order to feel good, it needs to put other people down. If you're wrong and I'm right, my ego feels better. My soul does not feel better. The soul does not need to put down anybody in order to feel good about itself. On the contrary, the soul lifts up others in order to feel good about itself. Because the soul is real, it's authentic, it's divine. The ego needs to put down. So when I'm in a mode of judgmentalism, I'm coming from a place of ego. There's frequencies that we tune into. There's a frequency now in the Jewish people. It's easy to lose. And this is something we have to hold on to. That frequency, what the Jewish people need is real connection, real unity, real love. And what the Jewish people need is real courage and real resolve. And what the Jewish people need is powerful emunah, faith and trust. And what the Jewish people need is what we always had, their greatest weapon, which is Torah and mitzvahs and tefillah and tshuva and masim tovim, and our connection with each other and with Hashem. And what happens is when things go back to normal, people lose that because that's human nature. So it's so important, it's very, very important, each one in our own way, to be able to hold on to these truths, to be able to hold on to these profound, deepest experiences of the Jewish people, which so define us and have defined us and will define us, because it's the only real truth. I want to live on my highest frequency. You want to live on your highest level of vibration. You want to be the best version of yourself. I want to be the best version of myself, and that's how we can radiate more light. There's something else a lot of people are asking. People feel guilty to take care of themselves now. There's people who have struggles. There are some people who still have struggles, yes. And some people feel guilty. How can I be taking care of myself and focusing on this problem and that problem in my marriage or with my children or with myself when all these things are happening? So here's the important dance. As I said, we're all in an army. Everybody was drafted to the army. And an army has many divisions. And you have to know what division you were drafted to. Everybody has to ask themselves, what is my shlichus today to help my brothers and sisters? Like the Rabbi wrote in that letter, it's not about me as an individual, it's me representing the Jewish people. But here's a truth, and that is, for me to give my light to the world, to the Jewish people, for you to give your light to the Jewish people, it's only when you're in touch with your deepest self. The work of healing, the work of integration, the work of taking care of your soul and your body is not selfish work. It's divine work. It's avodas Hashem. It's making sure that you can be the light that you're capable of being. I cannot give to somebody else what I don't have. I can't give love that I don't have. I can't give hope that I don't have. I can't give faith that I don't have. I can't give courage that I don't have. I can't give stamina that I don't have. I can't give protection that I don't have. I can't give safety I don't have. I can't give bitachon that I don't have. I can't give compassion that I don't have. I could try, but it's external, it's fake. It's like a Hatzalah guy taking a patient to the ambulance and doesn't have gas. So they fill up gas. I'm not selfish. I don't fill up gas. I got to take him to the hospital. Without gas, I can't go anywhere. Today, to be anchored in your own spiritual power is not a selfish thing. It's very, very powerful, because when we're anchored, when our minds and our souls are anchored in clarity, in truth, in emes, in amunah, in love, in healing, that allows each of us to radiate that to other people. And everyone is part of this. Everyone is part of this physically or spiritually. And if I have an hour and I could focus on that hour, I'm bringing light to the world. I can learn Torah, I can do a mitzvah, I can daven. I can reach out to somebody else, I can give tzedakah. So then it's a very, very powerful, powerful spiritual tool that helps the Jewish people. And when I'm anchored and I do it with sensitivity and attentiveness, it's not ignoring my brothers and sisters. On the contrary, it's showing up with your full presence. And showing up with our full presence on every level is exactly what the Jewish people need. Physically, militarily, of course, but also emotionally and spiritually. Because for us, the soul and the body works together. I also want to suggest something else, and that is, I feel this is a tremendous time of Isairidus by the Jewish people. There were three things that were challenged very heavily recently, especially in Eretz Yisrael. And that is, Baal Shem Tov said there's three loves, right? There's Avos Hashem, Avos HaTorah, and Avos Yisrael. And the three were challenged very heavily. Avos Yisrael, there was a lot of fighting. And Avos HaTorah, there was a lot of religious and anti-religious terrible disputes in Israel. And Avos Hashem and his gift to Eretz Yisrael, the negativity that came out about Eretz Yisrael from Jews themselves, also very, very appalling. And today you see it was all switched. I know there are still some people, unfortunately, who are invested in believing the rhetoric of anti-Semites. But at least for many millions of Jews in Israel, and even outside of Israel, the three loves were reignited momentarily with tremendous passion. On Yom Kippur in Tel Aviv, the fighting over the davening, and today it's like a crazy memory. How could have we been so insane fighting about davening in Tel Aviv on Yom Kippur when Iran and Hamas were preparing? They wanted to slaughter 20,000 Jews. They ended up slaughtering 1,400 Jews. They wanted to slaughter 20,000 or better, 100,000 Jews. They wanted to go to Yerushalayim. They didn't expect that response, even after a few hours. The response was too late, but even after a few hours. So the Avos Yisrael was ignited. It's like where they want us in Auschwitz, they want us all in Auschwitz. And it was with Nazi Goinas that they did this. I don't know if you read, between the drones and the missiles and the motorcycles and the grenades and the bombs and the boats. This was done with a Nazi-like Goinas, which means it's the imprint of Iran that uses their brain to figure out how you could kill more innocent people. The brilliance of the sadism is unparalleled. So when Jews realize that and they feel it, it's like, we're going to fight now about our opinion about a judge. We're going to fight. Jews have disagreements. They're going to have disagreements after this war too, I can promise you. The problem is not to have disagreements. Couples have disagreements. Nothing wrong with having a disagreement with your husband. If you have a Jewish husband, you should have a disagreement. That was just a joke. The issue of Jews is not disagreements. Disagreements are not bad at all. In fact, they can enhance people's lives. The fact that my wife disagrees with me is good for me. It's not bad for me. Makes me a better person. The issue is it's when disagreements turn into a lack of trust. I can't trust you. You're not here for me. We're not here for each other. Suddenly they realized, with all our disagreements, right? You have Nazis that want to murder your children alive and brutalize them and behead your people. you're dealing with a whole different type of enemy. If we're not connected, if we're not fighting together, first of all, we don't realize who we are, and we're not going to be able to survive. So the Avos Yisrael was ignited in an extraordinary way. There was also an Avos HaTorah that was reignited. The Yisraelis in Israel today for every Dover Shebekdusha is incredible. From Tefillin to Tzitzis to Mezuzah to other mitzvahs. Somebody was saying, a woman called him up from Ashkelon, and she said, could you please bring Shabbos candles to my house? I'm here, I can't leave. Ashkelon was rattled with rockets. And she tells him, she starts crying, I never lit Shabbos candles my whole life. Could somebody bring it to my house and tell me what I say before the Shabbos candles? You told me yesterday that he went into a kibbutz, one of the most left-wing secular kibbutzim. They would have never looked at a person like him. It would have been very, very difficult. And they lost a son. And he was sitting with them. And he was just empathetic. And this is people who grew up with an anti-religious sentiment that was so powerful. And they told him that this son, for the last 2 years, was putting on tefillin, to their dismay. And he just sat with them and they said, could you come back? So you have a type of Yisraelis today among Jews that is very, very unique. And then there's also the Avos Hashem, the connection to our Creator who gave us this land. It's the only reason we have this land. The only reason Jews have this homeland is because God gave it to them, and Jews can't be embarrassed from saying that to the whole world, like the first Rashi in Chumash. So it's a very powerful time now. It's a very powerful time to bring Jews together, to inspire Jews. Everybody has influence on themselves, on their families, and also sometimes on other people. And as we said before, the way Noach saved the world was not by Noach becoming the superhero of the Jewish people who stood above everybody else. Noach's power was the fact that he was a regular human being who did the right thing at the right time and did not surrender to depravity, did not surrender to immorality, did not surrender to promiscuity, did not surrender to negativity, to evil, to darkness. Despite his flaws and his shortcomings, he was the regular person. He is the one who saves the whole world. And that's a very powerful lesson in life. Because the perspective that a person is saying, I'm just a small Jew, that's what Rabbi Yochanan and Rashi were trying to dispel. We don't believe in that word. Because what does small mean? What does small mean? Is saving the whole world small? What? Very nice. Rashi says he was a klumnik. You know what a klumnik means? Garnished. Klum. Haya klum. Lo nechshav leklum. In yeshiva, if he was growing up, what would they tell Noach? Relative to him, klum. Ata klum. You're nothing. And who ends up saving the world? Not Avram Avinu, him. Avram, he was you couldn't compare him. But he saved the world. What does that teach you? What is Judaism saying? The world is saved by a Noach. Eli Beers, the head of Atzala, was telling me, when he was 15 years old, he saw a bomb. He saw a bus exploding from a suicide bomber. 6 people died. He was a kid. He was 15. And he saw that the response was so slow in coming because the traffic in Yerushalayim, you know the traffic in Yerushalayim. So till ambulances came and till they came for the wounded, it took a long time. And somebody died there because there was no treatment for them. So he went to the Red Cross and he went to the head in Israel and he said, we have to create Hatzalah filled with people everywhere so they could right away come. The person says, how old are you? He says, 15 years old. He says, why aren't you in school? He says, it's not for me. ADHD on steroids. Eli said, the thing he goes to sleep at night is, he says, anybody heard this program? He says he listens to my shorts because they're only 1 minute. Not more than 1 minute. He said, class is not for me. 1 minute, every night he goes to sleep. I was very honored. In fact, the name of his book is 90 Seconds. That's the name. Give me if you can't say it in 90 seconds, don't say it. It should be a school like that, 90 Seconds. It's a good name, no? 90 Seconds. The truth is the most powerful statements in life you'll hear in 90 seconds. If I can't say it in 90 seconds, it's not worth saying it. What am I saying? I forgot. Oh, so this guy in the Red Cross turns to Ali Bear and says, 15 years old, out of school, let me give you an idea. You should be running a falafel stand in Yerushalayim. And he sent him out of his office. So what do you do when you're 15 years old? He basically told him, I said, you're 15 years old. You're a dropout of school. You can't even graduate elementary. Now you're telling me, the head of the Red Cross, how to run this? So naturally, Eli Beer should have looked in the mirror and said, I guess I'm a klumnik. Let me go help a guy in the falafel. We'll do shwama. Nothing wrong with feeding Jews shwama and hummus. What did he do instead? He said, okay, im eina nili, mili. And he went, and as a 15-year-old boy, he founded Israel United Hatzalah, that has today 15,000 volunteers all over the country. And they have their little motorcycles, what are they called? Amicycles. And anywhere in the country there's something, they could there within between 1 minute, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, and it has saved countless lives. And it's Simchas Torah in the morning, he told me he right away went. His wife is also a doctor, and they went to the front lines to save people. So as a 15-year-old, he was a Yaklumnik. And everyone in their own way could look at themselves and say, well, I'm just a regular person. I live in Monsey, I live in Lakewood, I live in Williamsburg, I live in Monroe, I live in Borough Park, or I live wherever I live. It's very easy to go to that place. Comes Rashi and says, Yesh me Rabbi Seinu. There are those who compliment Noach and say, in another generation, he would have been Azoinz and Azalches. But then Rashi says, now I'm going to give you a deeper interpretation. Not a negative one, a deeper interpretation. Yesh me Rabbi Seinu. There are other rabbis who say, the Torah wants to teach you something deeper. And that is, actually, in another generation, he would have not stood out relative to Avraham Avinu. His light wasn't the infinite light of Avraham Avinu or Moshe Rabbeinu. And you know what? And this person who could have looked at himself and said, am I so different? I'm not. Okay. I'm just trying to do what Hashem wants. And he is the one who saved the entire world. And all of history is indebted to him and his wife, of course, and his children. There's always the wife beneath the wings, the wind beneath the wings. If he wouldn't have had a good wife whose name was Nama, which means sweetness, I don't think Noach would have survived. So I keep on giving credit to Noach. We should also give credit to Mrs. Noach. Maybe more. That you'll already decide with your husband. But that's the powerful point. And the lesson for eternity, like everything in Torah, that when a person looks at themselves, they have to understand that by me showing up where I need to show up in my corner of the world, bringing out my deepest light and my deepest love, it's not inconsequential. Sometimes it's this that impacts me, my loved ones, my community, the Jewish people, and the whole world. Everybody have a beautiful week and a wonderful week. And may we hear very, very good news of our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael. Sorry, before you get up, I wanted to say one thing. Shh. Everybody always wants to do something. This is just something very practical. Created with the help of somebody, a website. It's called onemitzvah.org/Israel/Rabbi YY Jacobson. onemitzvah.org/Israel/Rabbi YY Jacobson. You could send it to Jews, whoever you know, even if they seem disconnected. And it's an opportunity for Jews to accept upon themselves something in Torah and mitzvahs for our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael. This is a time of tremendous isirus. So we don't want to forfeit the opportunity, not for ourselves and not for our brothers. We know that our weapons, we need the military weapons, v'derech hateva, but our eternal weapon for thousands of years has been Torah and mitzvahs and achdus and emunah. So again, onemitzvah.org/Israel/Rabbi YY Jacobson. And if you send that, you'll see there's a list. It's very nice. Somebody designed it very nicely. And it gives people an opportunity. You could send to a relative, an employer, an employee, a partner, a neighbor, a cousin, whatever it is, to accept upon themselves a mitzvah. And just to conclude and say that, this is a very, very critical but also very special time. Because when beneath all the pain there is love. Remember, the reason everybody is in pain is because if there would be no love, you wouldn't be in pain. So whenever you're feeling pain, remember that all this is because of your love. It doesn't take away the pain, but it shows you what it's about. Don't feel bad that you're having pain. You're having pain because you have love. If you wouldn't have love, I promise you wouldn't have pain. You would sit on your couch, sip a coffee, and just smile to yourself. The reason we're having pain, the reason everybody has been crying a lot is because you have a lot of love. So focus on the pain, but also tune into the love. And let the love inspire us for Torah, for tefillah, for tzedakah, for Gemilus Chasadim, for Avos Yisrael, and for doing anything we can, physically, emotionally, financially, spiritually, to help our soldiers and to help our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land. Please remember, next week, I'm away, so there's no class next week. And also, Thursday, 6:30, I'm having a virtual program with children who can ask all their questions online on theyeshiva.net. Thursday, 6:30 p.m. Have a beautiful day, and B'suras Tovos. You're welcome. Thank you. Wow.
You set up this for people who don't really support Israel. It was very important.
Yes,
Beit
yes.
Shemesh and from such from
Yes,
Erech
of
Habol's
course.
learning on the
The
front.
best of the
They're
best.
learning on the front.
These are the best of the best.
Yeah.
It's your grandson. Hashem should protect him. He should come home safe and healthy and fine. It's going to be good. It's going to be good. Bruchim Abayim, a lange Zeit nicht gesehen.
It's my schedule every week. Sometimes I
Okay. Mazel tov for the bar mitzvah.
Thank you. It's very special that you all came.
Yes, yes.
If you could tell those
Thank you for the nuts and the popcorn.
I worked very hard. Papa.
I'm sure you did.
The both Satmar Rebbes announced before Satmar, right, and that they should have. So you tell that to those Hasidim because the both Rebbes have the ideology well good.
I hear
They're
you.
mixed up, maybe their parents.
I understand.
Both Rebbes.
I understand. You're welcome. Thank you. Oh, welcome.
You're saying that the Yishmaelim, if Avram Avinu, okay, we come from the Arabs come from Yishmael, but then everything was wiped out in the Dar Mabel, so everybody's coming from Noach. What are the Arabs saying? I know Ham is from the, but Yishmael was
So what's it?
the Arabs are saying their father is Avram Avinu too, because they're from Yishmael.
Yeah.
So the Dor Mabel, everything was this. We're all coming from Noach.
Yeah.
The Arabs come from
Oh yeah. Everybody comes from Noach.
The Arabs don't know that,
No, later. They mean later generations. Everything comes from Noach and his family. Because his children came out, Shem, Cham, and Yafes.
right, but Yishmael wasn't there. Yishmael was finished.
No, Yishmael's Avram's son. That's generations later. Avram was 10 generations after Noach.
As you can see, you know my belief. I really, really feel that the whole idea of Israel and against them or not is really not given over properly. And the people that come with having questions are, the chain got broken, sort of.
I hear you.
Because they're forgetting the equal thing. There was a person came into the Satmar Rebbe and he asked for money. He was not a frum person. He was a Tzioni and he asked him for money. And he gave him money. He said he doesn't have money. He gave him money. So the Gabba says, Rebbe is a Tzioni. Why did he give him money? So the Rebbe answered, this hat Eisiki mit dem Zweiten. Er darf Geld, er ist Ayid, ich gebe ihm Geld. So the main part is that the whole Masoiva is broken and it's not given over properly. Okay?
Got it.
You know what Hasidish, and I wonder.
Because my father Ovashal was a very big Kanoi. He went to the Koisel. I'm supposedly I'm a Saka. I go to the Koisel. Why? Because we grew up in Yerushalayim. He was a brilliant, very Cheshvan person, my father, and he gave it over to us so well, explaining what we were against and what we're for. Never ever in our house was such a
Was it
thing
distorted?
that he's a soldier and
The shepherd, the Lubavitch has arrived.
and
I just want to say goodbye.
Be with Hatzlacha, moving to Eretz Yisrael. Pribashat Toivo Mitzlachas. May we all follow you, Bekar of Mamash.
Amen. Everybody should follow. My mother became a little Yes, we were classmates. And I just wanted to say that Zekel is my cousin's, my niece's husband's cousin.
Oh, really? Dekel Suissa.
She posted
He killed 60 he killed 60 terrorists and then they shot
I
him.
know that story is because my sister posted it to me. My niece's husband's
They were even brought up against the tzava. I have to tell you, I'm blown away how boys didn't get married and they went straight to the army. Who would do this? Am I really used? You're brought up against it. It's not even a conversation. Finished up with a conversation.
Yeah. Welcome back. So you drove from Lakewood? Oh, wow.
During COVID, your Porsche, what you did for her, I think has what to do with why she's failing.
Really? Wow, how is she?
Details, I don't ask her, but okay is a miracle.
Wow.
It's a miracle. She has both her kids with her.
She's home.
The whole time, her doctors gave her a little break over the
She's more upbeat. Wow. Yes, thank you. Thank you for coming and making the effort. Thank you. Chazak ve'amatz. Huh?
My name is Rabbi. I live in remote Yerushalayim and in Passaic, New Jersey. Mostly now in remote. Hashem put me here for Yontif.
Wow.
And I'm here, but my daughter is Baruch Hashem back in Yerushalayim with her children. And I just
Your daughter lives in Ramot also?
in Ramat.
Oh.
My husband had a stroke 12 years ago and he wanted to live with Hashem, so we moved next to Rabbi Weiss.
Wow.
And we're very close to Rabbi.
So you live in Ramot?
Ramot Gimel, near Rabbi
Wow.
Weiss.
Yeah.
My husband died as a Rabbi Weiss.
Wow.
So I had to tell you a crazy story.
Yeah.
I have a friend, her name is Leah Coy. She's
Yeah.
a beautiful girl. I used to meet her every time in the nail salon.
Yeah.
She ran the nail salon in Ramada.
Yeah.
And we got talking because she spoke English. She looked totally out from. Anyways, finally, I realized she has a lot of issues. I said to her one day, I said, Leah, you live in Givatzel. I live in Remote. Come to my porch. Let's talk one night and let's hear what your problem is. She starts telling me how her husband had a farce life. She was living in Givatzel, a fancy house, and everything she needed, but her life was a farce. He was living on borrowed money, and one day it all came crashing down. Now she has one son who's on drugs, another daughter, and she lived in a room, and a young daughter, and she wants to take her life. What's her future? I said to her, I promise you one thing. You start keeping Shabbos. Hashem is going to be with you. That's what I said to her. How can I keep Shabbos?